Hello Year 8. Today we're going to continue our look at the history of the slave trade and the British Empire, and we're asking the question, what was the Middle Passage? First thing I want you to do is to have a look at this image here. You should be familiar with this image. What is it? How did it work? How did this route make England such a rich country? So take a moment, pause the video, see if you can answer those three questions. Okay, so this is the triangular trade route, which you looked at last lesson and completed your extended piece of writing on. You can see here how manufactured goods from Britain were taken to the west coast of Africa, textiles, rum and other goods which were sold and traded here. At this point, British sailors and merchants would buy captured people from the western states of Africa, and they would put them onto ships and they would be transported to British colonies here in the Americas, in the Caribbean, and some would be sold on to what became the United States of America. In this point, sugar and cotton and tobacco was farmed, and those goods would be transported back to Britain, where they would be used to make new products. And this became known as the triangular trade. And it's really what made England and Britain such a rich country in the 18th and 19th centuries, because they could control all of the different aspects of the trade. They could sell goods here to the Western African states. They had free labour from the captured people of Africa, who they would transport across to their colonies, who could then work for free for the British owners of these plantations, and then they could sell the goods they made back to their market in England. Today we're going to look at this part of the triangular trade, which is called the Middle Passage, and ask the question, what was the Middle Passage? So here's a quote from a man called Zambezembola, who was sold as a slave in America in the 19th century. And he says, after being about 15 days out to sea, a heavy squall struck the ship. The poor slaves below, altogether unprepared for such an occurrence, were mostly thrown to the side, where they lay heaped on the top of each other. Their fetters, their chains, rendered many of them helpless, and before they could be arranged in their proper places and relieved from their pressure on each other, it was found that 15 of them were smothered or crushed to death. The captain seemed considerably vexed, annoyed. But he wasn't angry about the deaths. The only grievance to him was the sudden loss of some $5,000 or $6,000. So here you see a quote from a person who was captured and enslaved, showing how people were viewed on the ships. To add some more context to that, we're going to have a look at this short clip from a BBC programme called History File.
At the coast, we were kept there for a long time, in prisons they called barracoons. There were so many people there, all speaking their own languages. I felt lonely. I missed my family. I wanted to go home. Men, women, boys, girls, all slept in the same place. It wasn't right. They kept us like this for a long time, and one day men came and we were taken out. They looked us over and some of us were made to go with them onto a very big ship.
What happened then?
I was put down under the decks. The air stank. I wanted to die. There were so many people crammed into the hole that no one could move. The chains on my wrist and ankles rubbed my skin to the bone. It was very dirty, and many people died.
This was the Middle Passage. It took between 6 and 12 weeks. Inside the hold of the ship, they were kept in filthy conditions. It was a perfect breeding ground for disease.
How could they stand it?
Some of them couldn't, but others found ways to survive and even to resist what was happening to them.
We're always on guard. If we give them the slightest chance, they'll try to take over the ship.
We had to keep them in chains till we saw the land in the Caribbean. Otherwise, they would have killed us.
Whenever they get a chance, they will fight hard and will not give in.
They are desperate and will do anything for freedom.
Did anyone get away? It was very unlikely. The odds were too high.
Okay, so there you have a short clip about the conditions on the Middle Passage. Having watched the video, I would like you to pause and answer these 3 questions. What does the video show about the conditions slaves were kept in on British ships? How did the slave owners view the people they had captured? How did slaves resist? So now we're going to look at some sources from the time to find out more information about the Middle Passage. We're going to look at 6 different sources. I want you to take a moment to pause the video and draw this table in your book. You will need at least a page to fit the information on. Thank you. Now you've drawn the table. We're going to look at 6 different sources. I'm going to look at the first one with you, and then you're going to complete the next 5 by yourselves. The sources you can find on the second PowerPoint that was attached to show my homework. So we'll go through source A together, then I want you to do sources B, C, D, E and F by yourself. So here is source A. It's an image of a plan of a slave ship called the Brooks. The image was produced in the early 19th century, actually by people who wanted to ban the slave trade, to show you the conditions in which people were kept. So you can see here you've got the plan of the ship. This would be underneath the ship, underneath the deck of the ship, and you can see how people were laid out and chained together in order to stop them from moving. Really, this is an example of what it must have looked like in terms of what people viewed, how ship owners, British ship owners, viewed their captured slaves. Not as people, but as cargo, as goods, to pack as many in as possible in order to make as much money as possible. And it really tells you about the disgusting conditions in which these people were kept. So looking at this table, we've got our sources on one side, we might say what it tells you about the Middle Passage. Well, slaves were packed into ships like cargo. They tried to fit as many people into the ship as possible. Slaves were treated like ordinary goods, not like people. What I want you to do now is to pause the video and to have a look at the next few sources. Look at the images carefully and read the information carefully. I want you to capture as much information as you can in each of these spaces. Try to think of at least 3 bits of information for each source. So pause the video and do that task now. It should take at least 15 minutes to do that task properly. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through the different sources now. So we did source A together. Source B was a source written by a surgeon who served on a number of slave ships. And what it really shows you here was the type of conditions people were forced to live in. The floor covered with blood, the mucus, the heat, the stench, the foul air, and really interestingly, the kind of food they were given. Horse beans, boiled jams and rice, and perhaps not much of it. Again, emphasizing the poor conditions in which captured people were kept. In source C, we can think about what this tells us about how the owners of the ships thought of their captured people who were enslaved on those ships. We see 6 slaves being thrown overboard, where they would definitely die, either by drowning or being eaten by a shark. This shows you that the slave owners did not view their the captured people as people, but as cargo who could be dispensed with, and then they could claim back the money lost on their insurance if they were thrown overboard and died. Here we see some information from an ex-slave trader, again telling us more about the conditions in which people were forced to travel in. Here we can see the shackles, the chains in which people were kept in on the slave ships. And here we got an extract from a very important man called Olaudah Equiano, who was an ex-slave who was really important in fighting for the abolition of slavery in Britain. So he was a black slave, and it was his writing that really helped to lead the eventual banning of slavery. And this is a direct first-person account of the kind of conditions in which he faced on the Middle Passage. Okay, take another minute now, pause, go back through the sources and see if you can add any more information. Okay, great. To finish off, I would like you to answer this question. What was life like for slaves on the Middle Passage? I want you to complete these 2 sentences. From the sources, I have learned that on the Middle Passage, and on this section, I want you to add at least 3 facts that you have learned about the Middle Passage. Then, overall, I think the Middle Passage was. I want you to describe how you felt about the Middle Passage and the conditions in which enslaved people were kept. Okay, so pause your video and start that task now. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting. Please make sure you submit your work via email or on Show My Homework. Thanks. Bye-bye.